You are asleep when the sounds change. Gunshots, voices shouting. You gather your children and hide in the bathroom, listening, waiting, knowing that waiting might not be enough. When the fear becomes unbearable, you crawl through the dark at 2 a.m., dragging your children with you, praying that the door you knock on will open. And it does. But by morning, your home is no longer a home. What happens when survival becomes a cycle of flight after flight, loss after loss? How much of it can you bear to survive? Welcome to Vestiges of Violence. Here, we talk about survivors. For Human Angle, I am Sabika. Gina Bashir is a 46-year-old farmer from Askira Uba in Borno, northeastern Nigeria. At the peak of the Boko Haram insurgency, she lived in Benisheik, a small town in Borno, with her husband and 6 children. They were living peacefully when the attacks began. The insurgent group, Boko Haram, who became violent in 2009, had launched their first attack in Benisheik. A few months later, they attacked again. By the third time, the violence had reached her neighbors, who were killed inside their home. That was when fear fully took hold of her.
When I started hearing gunshots and chants, I packed my children and myself into the bathroom to hide. But I wasn't comfortable. I told them we should go to my eldest son's house. I called him and said what was happening. We started crawling in the middle of the night. It was 2 a.m. We crawled until we reached his door.
When Gina returned home the next morning, around 9 a.m., the house had been riddled with bullets. There was so much destruction that the house became uninhabitable. So she fled to Askira Uba, her hometown. But the insurgency was unrelenting, and it would follow her 2 years later when Boko Haram attacked Askira Uba. This time, the losses were unbearable.
They killed my brother, my nephew, and 6 other relatives. My brother had just retired from the army and returned home. When the terrorists came, he was about to run with everyone else, but they met him right in front of his house and shot him.
Her nephew was also shot. He was the only son among 8 daughters.
He had gunshots where his sisters were and went to them. They gave him a hijab to wear. But when the terrorists came, they knew he was a man. They removed the hijab, put him in the middle of his sisters, and gunned him down.
That moment, Gina says, never left her. She became so terrified that sleep evaded her on most nights. Even now, Gina has nightmares where her dead loved ones appear as if in real life, and she has to pray the false figures away. Once it's midnight, she says, she awakes and for the rest of the night, tosses and turns without being able to go back to sleep until the sun rises. When the attacks came again in Askira Uba, they took everything. They burned all of Gina's belongings, all the farm produce she had harvested, everything. Gina is a farmer, and farming has always been her major source of livelihood. In Benisheik, she farmed and sold bean cake in the mornings before heading to the fields. She contributed to her household and sustained herself through her labor. Before fleeing, she had harvested 48 bags of rice and 40 bags of groundnuts.
I walked come rain, come shine. As rain poured over me, I walked. And not even a single grain did I get to put in my mouth. Everything was burned, including the house. It hurt my heart badly.
Gina and her family eventually arrived in Iliri in Gombe, northeastern Nigeria. At the entrance of the town, they were stopped and told there were ongoing communal clashes and they had to wait out the fight.
My children's feet were broken and bleeding. We had no sleep. I said, "Oh my God, we have fled one fight only to meet another." We waited for hours until after midnight before we were allowed to enter.
When they arrived, the village head welcomed them and assured them they had a home there. Still, safety has not brought rest. Gina says she suffers from nightmares, dizziness, and a burning sensation in her feet. She dreams of her brother and of her son who was killed in a car accident in Benisheik before the insurgency. For the first few years, her family received food aid in Iliri, but that ended more than 5 years ago. Aid no longer comes now. Her bean cake business did not survive the move, so she has stopped rather than sink into debt. But Gina continues to farm, and her husband remains a businessman. However, the household has never fully recovered. This violence has lingered for over a decade, and even now, when she goes back to her hometown, Gina comes face to face with the terror that forced her to leave. Last month, on New Year's Day, another nephew and another brother were killed during a fresh attack. When asked what her hopes for the future are, Gina asks what the point of having ambitions is if they do not manifest. But simply, she wants her children to advance in their studies and get degrees. She wants her youngest child's school fees paid. She wants food and sound sleep. Gina wants to go to the hospital for her mental health and general well-being. After years of flight and loss, Gina Bashir is still standing and farming and surviving. The war took so much from her and not much has been built after it. But as long as she has food to eat, she says, then there's enough to live. This story was reported and scripted by Sabiga Bello. Multimedia editor is Anthony Asemota, and executive producer is Ahmed Salkida. In order to protect the identities of survivors, we use voice actors for this episode. If you or anyone you know have a story to share on vestiges of violence, do not hesitate to get in touch with us.
Boko Haram da suka shiga sun shiga sau biyu muna can sun zo sun shiga na uku sai ga neighbors namu ga gidana ga gidan